Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. My name's Mark Allen, and I'm going to talk about Perl Platform as a Service Shootout. My idea here was for this talk, and I'm kind of going to talk fast. It's endemic with me. I can't help it. What I want to talk about is platform support for Perl with a bunch of different platform providers. And what I've noticed is that there's a lot of companies that say that they will take away all of your system administration problems. Basically, all you have to do is do some magic with Git and deploy it onto their servers, and it'll just automatically scale everything up for you, and it'll just work, and it's awesome. Unfortunately, what they're usually talking about is some Ruby on Rails application or something that they've already automated for you. So if you're using Perl as your platform to build web apps on top of, what I wanted to test and check out and kind of talk about today was, how magical support do you get with Perl in that environment? Is it the same level? Is it the same? Is it different? Is it good? Is it bad? What's ugly? So that's kind of what we're going to explore today. First off, I just kind of wanted to talk about what a platform as a service is. The idea is that coders don't have to be system administrators. You deploy your code, magic happens, your application's live on some URL that you've chosen. One of the things I thought was really interesting was that they have, it started off supporting web apps only, but now it also supports workers. So you can actually do, like processing with worker processes. So if you needed to rescale like a batch of thousands of images or something, you could easily set up a worker queue that you could submit jobs to, and it would go ahead and process all those things. So it's kind of exciting. There's two different pathways now, and some clouds are better supporting workers than others. We'll kind of talk about what platforms I looked at and which ones have good support and which ones don't. But I already talked about this. I'm going to skip it. So I wrote this test application called GOTZ, and the idea was that I would supply a JSON encoded list of IP addresses, and I wanted this application to return the UTC offset for each time zone. So my sample input is 24, 24, 24, 24, and you can see that that's located in Buffalo, New York, and the offset there is minus 14,400 seconds. There's some additional information that gets pulled out of the database using MaxMind's GeoIP Lite product to gather this information. One of the things that makes GeoIP kind of a unique test case for deploying stuff onto magical services is that it requires XS, and it requires C, and it requires a library. It also doesn't have a well-behaved makefile for Perl. In other words, it complains if it can't find the C library, and so that means that you have to take extra steps. And because it's sort of truculent, I thought it would be a really good test for testing how magical support is. As it turns out, if you know what you're doing with these platforms, you can actually do a pretty good job with it. So what I did was I took this idea and I implemented it on 4 different web frameworks. I wrote an application for Dancer. I wrote an application for Mojolicious. I wrote one in Python for Flask, and I wrote one in Erlang called Web Machine. And I figured, if I can find something that does Erlang, then that'll really stress test things. And as it turns out that Erlang's like a unicorn. It doesn't have very good support anywhere for these platform providers. Some of them do have build packs, or they do have support for Erlang, but it's pretty experimental, and it's not at all easy or straightforward to get it up and running. But we'll dive more into that in a few minutes. I just wanted to cover the dependencies. So you can see kind of what we're talking about here. For Dancer, it's try-tiny and regex common, datetime, JSON, and GeoIP. I already mentioned that one. Mojo has basically the same list. Since Mojo has its own JSON library, it is a dependency, but it's included in a single cpan minus installation. It also uses try-tiny, regex common, datetime again. Python has 3 dependencies because it comes with a whole bunch of stuff in core like JSON support. You don't have to download stuff from the Python equivalent of CPAN, which they call ChiShop or PyPy. There's Flask and PyTZ and GeoIP. I should note that that the PyGeoIP here is actually the pure Python implementation. There is a C-based version also that's available from MaxMind, but it's not on ChiShop, so you can't actually type something like pip install GeoIP and have it download and compile itself, which is kind of annoying. but PyGeoIP is, and so it's a lot easier to install automatically. And then Erlang uses a framework called Web Machine, and it depends on MokiWeb and eGeoIP. The time zone support in eGeoIP is really bad, and it's pretty deficient compared with the other platforms. It really only tells you the offset, and it doesn't give you the same sort of rich information that you can get from Perl or Python or Ruby, for that matter. So it's a little bit behind the times. I guess the people that are doing geo with Erlang don't really care too much about time zones. That's fine. My application is somewhat arbitrary and silly anyway, so that's a fine limitation. So here's a list of the providers that I looked at. I know that there are others. I don't have any results for Staccato for you today because my trial ended, and so the URLs that I was using don't work anymore. So they're not in the slide deck. But Staccato does have pretty good support for things. OpenShift is Red Hat's implementation of doing a platform as a service, and it has really, really, really old Perl. It has 5.10.1 as its Perl support, and it only really comes out of the box with mod Perl support. So if you have a PSGI compliant Perl web app, then it's kind of a challenge to get your stuff up and running in OpenShift as it stands today. They do have this feature where you can go ahead and like roll your own automation, but that was a lot more work than I was willing to put in, so I didn't really test it very much. There's also a service called FlexFlux, which, as far as I could tell, is a Japanese platform as a service provider, but they're closing down at the end of this month, so I didn't include them in here. It is a really neat service, and it's super cheap. That's probably why it's going out of business. Seriously, it's like $2 a month or something. It's ridiculously cheap, and it also has really good Perl support. But they're closing, so I didn't include it in here. There's also one competing product from Ubuntu called Juju. And I didn't really look at that because I found out about it too late. I found out about it last month, and I don't really have time. I didn't have enough tuits to get around to testing things on it. So I don't know if it has good Perl support or not, but it is out there, and if you're interested in this topic, maybe you'd consider it for your deployment. So the two service providers that I really focused on were Heroku and .cloud. And I just want to talk about like how I decided to evaluate these things. I already talked about how ease of deployment was important to me. One of the other things I considered was performance, like how well do these things perform relative to the others. I also was interested in cost, like how much does it cost to get started with this stuff. And then I also, as I mentioned, wondered how magical is Perl support. In other words, we're using Perl, and Perl isn't like on the happy path of whatever they decide to support. And just how easy or hard is it for us to get in to these platform providers using Perl? Like I said, first class or hack together. Generally, it's somewhere in the middle, but I'll talk more about that in a second. I decided to get rid of performance and cost, and you can argue with me about this. I'm totally open to that. One of the things I decided about performance is that it's somewhat arbitrary anyway, because it's already affected by network latency, and also my application is somewhat silly. If you were doing my application in production, you would absolutely want to have the C version, the XS version of the GeoIP libraries available, because they're so much faster than pure Perl. And cost was another thing that I decided to kind of discard along the same reasons. The cost is going to be totally relative to what your performance requirements are and how many web worker processes you want to have and how much web scale you need and how many hits you're going to handle. So I would say in general, the cost and performance are important for your application or looking at this problem in a serious way. But for the terms of what I was evaluating things on, it was more important to me to talk about ease of deployment and Perl support in general. So I decided those were the two most important criteria. The other things definitely are important, but I didn't really evaluate them very thoroughly. And anyway, the costs and performance were relatively the same. So it ended up kind of being a wash in general. And the reason I think is because at the end of the day, most of this stuff gets backed up on Amazon EC2 anyway. They kind of scaffold Amazon for you. So at the end of the day, if you roll your own on Amazon, you're going to have roughly equivalent performance based on how smart you are setting up your own Amazon instances. But anyway, that was my performance criteria. So here's my findings. Getting PSGI compliant Perl web apps. As I said, I use Dancer and Mojo for Perl. With sensible dependencies is actually pretty pain-free. And I was pleasantly surprised by how easy it was for me to take my web apps and actually deploy them into both .cloud and Heroku. I had a bit of trouble getting both .cloud and Heroku to deal with the fact that GeoIP is kind of a silly Perl module in terms of how it gets built. If it had a better makefile and if it had more automation around dealing with the pure Perl part of this, it would be really, really smooth. In fact, you wouldn't even need any special handling to do it. But one of the things that I had to do, and if you go to the GitHub repo, I'm going to put at the end of the slide, you can see I had to use special shell scripts basically to work around the fact that GeoIP has a special requirement that you explicitly ask for pure Perl version, and it has to be downloaded and installed separately from all the other dependencies. Both Heroku and .cloud can read a makefile.pl, and you put all your prereqs in there, and cpan- will actually read that entire file and install them in the right place and in the right way for your application to work and find all of its dependencies. So it's pretty slick. With Heroku, one thing I did want to mention was you need to have a build pack. Heroku has a new I don't know what they're going to call it, but it's like a platform base, and it's called Cedar, and it kind of modularizes the way that they handle deployments into their environment. Right now they have build packs kind of out of the box that are officially supported for like Ruby and PHP and Node.js and Python and stuff like that. Perl has a couple of different ones. Miyagawa wrote one that I forked to use for my deployment, and there's another one out there called Perlroku, I think it's called, and I don't remember exactly what that one is, but it also works pretty well. What I found is that because Python is kind of supported out of the box, though, if you have I should mention here that the Python equivalent for Perl PSGI is WSGI, and if you have a WSGI compliant application in Python, deploying it in one of these environments is really, really straightforward and pain-free. I mean, it's really just a matter of installing their toolkit and writing a little wrapper, a little WSGI wrapper for your application, importing it in the right namespace, and deploying it, and you're pretty much done. It's really slick. But Perl is approaching the same level of ease and comfort. As I said before, Erlang is really a unicorn. I had so much trouble finding a place to that supported Erlang and had build packs or some sort of automation pre-scripted for it. It is definitely possible to support Erlang, I guess, if you have a super trivial web application. But generally, yeah, it's alpha quality and not very good. So you're still pretty much rolling your own or writing Chef or doing something with it to automate it. Here's a list of resources that I wanted to point out. The slides are available on SpeakerDeck there, my URL. Also, all the code that I wrote is available on GitHub, which I totally encourage you to go take a look at if you're curious about it. I'd also love for some other people to try the services. They are deployed right now. They're all live. I didn't give them fancy URLs or anything, especially Heroku's. So the way that it works is the first URL down there is for Dancer. It's the Dancer implementation of this. The second URL is the Python implementation that uses Flask. And the third URL is the Mojo implementation that's running on Heroku. I probably would have left them all on .cloud, except if you're a cheapskate like I am, you only get 2 free web apps on .cloud. So I put 2 of them on .cloud and 1 on Heroku. So, and then you just run the curl command there and pipe it to JSON PP, which is part of the JSON Perl module install. So that's my talk. Are there any questions or comments or? Go ahead.
I know that you discounted performance and cost, but do you have any performance numbers for us at all?
Well, like I said, they're pretty much the same. Yeah. So I mean, yeah, it takes network latency time to get your results back. I didn't do like thousands of benchmarks or anything like that because I did start off on that track, but then I decided that it would be kind of silly, and so I stopped doing it. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much network latency. I mean, yeah, running your stuff through pure Perl is also going to be a lot slower than running it through C, and that was another reason why I felt like collecting a lot of performance numbers would be silly. So.
The only other performance number I can think of is maybe how much memory the application takes to run, how expensive.
Yeah, the thing about Heroku and .cloud is they kind of abstract that stuff from you. There are dashboards that tell you that information. But this application was so kind of trivial that it didn't really matter too much. I will say that by far and away, I mean, I implemented this web app in about 30 lines of code total for Perl, and about 24 lines of code for Python, and about 65 lines of code for Erlang, plus thousands of dependency libraries. But anyway, it's super short and super easy. Because I'm using the MaxMind database, it's like 16 megabytes. So it by far and away is and I'm doing a mem map, so I'm mapping the entire file into memory once and then using it every time I get a query. So that is by far the largest memory application usage thing anyway. So yeah.
So when you were experimenting with getting, the compilation of GeoIP and so on working,
yeah,
were they pretty equivalent in terms of how much feedback you were getting, like how easy it was to determine what was going wrong?
Yeah, that's actually a really great question. I should have addressed it. Yeah, both Heroku and .cloud are really good about helping you figure out why your app is failing. And both of them allow you to actually .cloud allows you to have live direct SSH access to your instance. So you can actually, from their command line, you can type .cloud SSH and then your application name, which in my case was dancer perl pos .www, and it puts you actually in a shell on the server. So you can actually tail log files or manipulate settings files or whatever you need to do in there. But if you don't want to do that, you can also type Heroku logs and then your application name, or you can type .cloud log and your application name, and it will go out and fetch those logs for you and show you on your console exactly what's failing. And it shows you all the stuff from Nginx. It shows you all the stuff from Perl. It shows you all the stuff that you would get from the access log and from the error logs too. So yeah, there's a ton of debugging support, and it is really, really easy to figure out why it fails. Yeah.
And so is there anything really that would lead you to recommend .cloud or Heroku to someone, or are they pretty much equivalent in what they offer?
I guess I would say my experience overall was probably more straightforward on .cloud, but I liked Heroku just as well. And then one of the things that Heroku benefited from was the fact that I did all of my failures on .cloud. So I already worked out all the bugs for building in a hands-off way. By the time I got to Heroku, I had already figured out how to build GeoIP hands-off for .cloud, and I just replicated exactly the same method on Heroku. So start to finish, my Heroku experience was really fast, right? I mean, literally it was like 10 minutes from the time that I put it in to get and push it out to the servers, and it was running on the web. So, I mean, that's really cool. But I had already spent, hours of frustrating failures on .cloud that I eventually got to work. So, I guess, overall, I would say I like .cloud's interface a lot better. And I felt like it was a little more automatic. Like I said, with Heroku, you had to use this build pack. And Miyagawa already wrote one, so it's not like you have to write your own, but you do have to include that when you set up your service, and that's an extra step that you don't have to do in .cloud. So, yeah.
I know you said your trial expired on Staccato.
Yeah.
But as .cloud and Heroku are kind of similar offerings, tell us a little bit about what your experience was with Staccato versus the fully cloud solutions.
I thought that I liked Staccato a lot, and I think it's important to point out also that of all of these providers, there's only one that's here at this conference right now supporting it. So it is kind of a shame that I couldn't talk more directly about Staccato. But I thought that Staccato was actually a really, really good environment, and it does make things very straightforward. There are very few providers that are as committed as Active State is to maintaining really excellent Perl support. And while the other environments do fully support Perl and it's easy to do it on them, there's only one that is here today. So I guess I kind of gave them short shrift, and I shouldn't have, and that's a flaw in this presentation. But it was a good service, and it was pretty straightforward to figure out how to get it to work correctly.
Where did you install your, I assume Staccato has a client.
Yeah.
You manage it from, you just install it on your laptop?
Yeah, they have a developer sandbox, which basically will spin up a Staccato VM for you on EC2, and then they do have a command line interface, and you basically it's almost the same process. The command line stuff is different, but at the end of the day, it's pretty.
You didn't even have to install their software to try it out.
Well, they do have a command line thing that you need to have on your box, but yeah, but it's still the kind of this. All of these providers have a client. So .cloud has a command line thing that's written in Python, and Heroku has one that's like written in Ruby, I think. And they do all this stuff that on automates things for you. And Staccato is exactly the same. They have a command line client that does automatic stuff for you, like helps you package stuff and push it out to the cloud and all that good stuff. So
You're saying the experience is very similar. Even though one is
across all of them, yeah. Staccato, .cloud, Heroku, those are the ones that I looked at the most. And the experience is not exactly the same, but it's very similar across all of them. Yeah.
So what you can do with Staccato is you can run the VM on your laptop.
And you can do that too.
So we're doing a workshop for Staccato tomorrow. If you missed Ingy's talk and you want to try it out.
Yeah, I should have said, Ingy did do a talk yesterday about how to do it on Staccato, and they do have this VM environment where you can download a VM image, put it on your box, and test all this stuff locally on your own system. Yeah.
You mentioned that OpenShift with Perl 5.10.1.
Yeah.
I think that's the same with Heroku, I think.
Is it really?
Yeah, because it just uses whatever uses
Okay.
Perl that distribution has. I request all of you to send a request to whatever provider like Cloud, Heroku, Staccato, and to support more Perl. Because I approached them, all of them, to offer them support like C++ and Flash or whatever to build in the platform. The answer is always like, well, there's no enough requests from the community.
Okay.
So I urge all of you to send, hey, why not support Perl with pipeline with Keen 16? What is the latest version?
Yes, 5.16.
Supports 5.12, which is a good, but not the latest one.
Yeah. So for everyone on the stream that might be listening, Miyagawa suggested that everyone send email or make requests to all the platform providers asking for better Perl support, more recent Perl support, because a lot of them are running older Perls, and certainly not up to date. So, are there any other questions or comments? Okay, thanks very much. I appreciate your